The United States of America has never seen such a failure. According to US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, America is refusing to engage in open war with Iran, having failed to achieve its objectives, and hopes sanctions will work. At the same time, disregarding all of Donald Trump's threats, Iran and Oman made a deal to receive and share revenues from shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. And they did this, according to the Iranian side's own admission, despite direct opposition from the United States. At the same time, just the day before, the United States itself announced the completion of mine clearance in the central part of the same strait. And at the same time, the Trump administration announced that there would be no military attacks on Iran until the midterm elections. Well, as for the fact that the US left some goals for themselves, who cares? Well, so what? Nothing is impossible. They didn't achieve anything in this war. Well, that doesn't mean you have to keep it going. You can just stop it and hope, fingers crossed, that the sanctions, well, they'll definitely work. They used to work before, but this time, after the war, they'll definitely work. So let's break down this whole multi-layered picture step by step and put everything in its place. Because it looks like the Strait of Hormuz is opening up, but it's being opened by 3 sides at once. My name is Pechiy. Let's dive into this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell and leave your comment, probably closer to the end of the episode. So, let's start with the biggest announcement about the division of the Strait of Hormuz. According to Iran's Tasnim news agency, citing a representative of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Iran and Oman have made a deal to receive and share the revenues from shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. According to the representative of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran, the negotiations with Oman were delayed precisely because of the opposition from the United States. Let me remind you, Trump even publicly threatened Oman with bombings if it continued negotiations with Tehran. In other words, Tehran is publicly presenting this agreement as an achievement made in spite of, not thanks to, Washington. But here's the catch. At the same time, the United States itself today announced its own, much more significant step, without which this whole story would have looked completely different. The US Navy has completed an operation to clear mines from the central part of the Strait of Hormuz, a key waterway for global oil logistics. According to Axios, citing 2 American officials, the US Navy has cleared mines from the so-called median, that is, the dividing strip, which runs exactly in the middle between the territorial waters of Iran and Oman. According to Axios, the work has been going on for several months. American underwater drones have been systematically surveying the area. Private contractors were also involved in the operation, who were engaged in detonating or removing munitions. According to the plan of the American command, clearing the median will allow for 2-way ship traffic under US air cover. In parallel with American efforts, Iran and Oman were also conducting their own negotiations. According to the Iranian agency IRNA, the 2 countries' foreign ministers, Abbas Araghchi and Badr al-Busaidi, reached agreements on establishing a temporary corridor for ships and on joint demining efforts. In general, the Strait of Hormuz has become a place where everyone tries to show that this is their territory. Iran and Oman say, these are our waters, so let's divide them between ourselves and charge ships for passage. And Donald Trump has already managed twice in the past couple of weeks, albeit on social media, to declare that the Hormuz Strait is US territory. But as we can see, Iran and Oman do not agree with this. That would all be well and good, but the war that Donald Trump started 6 months ago has led to nothing. Not a single goal of the war that was set at the beginning by Donald Trump has been achieved. The economic D-Day for Iran promised by Donald Trump came and went on Monday without much shock or awe. Instead, it turned into yet another prolonged ultimatum and absolutely empty threats from the US. The operation was called Economic Outcast, meaning economic pariah. And, at least as promised by the US Treasury, it will unfold as a large-scale, slow-burning sanctions campaign, capable of eventually cutting off Iran's foreign accomplices from the US financial system. Well, at least that's what Donald Trump is counting on, but how it will actually turn out, no one really knows. But on Monday, everyone was expecting that the economic D-Day was about to come, and Scott Bessent, the US Secretary of the Treasury, said, "Well, once I announce the sanctions on the 24th, the whole world will be shocked." He said, "The world has never seen sanctions like these before." Well, it's already Wednesday on the calendar, but no one has found out what kind of sanctions the US is planning to impose. The US Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, as he put it, has launched an economic operation by adding more than 60 Iran-related targets to the blacklist. There are companies and legal entities, and expanding the scope of secondary sanctions. But, I emphasize, no sanctions have been imposed yet. There are just lists. Well, and as Bessent stated, quote, "Each country has a clearly defined schedule for winding down the activities we have identified." Bessent refused to name specific countries or deadlines, stating that the administration prefers quiet diplomacy before resorting to the US Treasury's hammer. The real test of this whole beautiful theory, of course, will be China, which accounts for about 90% of the oil exported by Iran and which remains one of the most important economic lifelines for the regime in Tehran. If Trump follows through on his threats, secondary sanctions could force Chinese banks, refineries and shipping companies to choose between Iran and access to dollars, American banks and markets. And when asked directly whether China would be targeted, Scott Bessent insisted that, quote, "No one is beyond the reach of US sanctions," but he gave no public indication as to when the deadline would expire. Or what is Trump actually prepared to do if Beijing refuses to cooperate? What if tomorrow Beijing comes out and says, "We don't care about American sanctions, we have bought and will continue to buy Iranian oil"? What will Trump do? What? This has never been stated. It is known that the chairman of the PRC, Xi Jinping, is scheduled to visit the White House on September 24th, which gives Trump another reason to think twice before risking a new confrontation with the world's second largest economy. And that means that nothing will happen at all in the coming month. Well, they threatened sanctions and then shelved them. In about a month, they'll bring them up again. Nevertheless, Donald Trump's idea to freeze the war until the midterm elections is pretty obvious. Sanctions and the naval blockade can continue to squeeze Tehran without risking an immediate new oil shock or getting more deeply entangled in an unpopular war. But economic coercion relies heavily on trust. China, the Emirates, Turkey, and in general the other remaining gateways to Iran must believe that Trump will actually impose
огромные издержки, которыми грозит.
Well, if they refuse to cooperate, they have to believe it. They need to understand that, look, yes, it's very risky, because if we continue to work with Tehran, then we'll get hit with sanctions. But the situation is such that very few people believe it. Because Trump, well, has already promised so many major strikes, sanctions and so on, that very few people believe his words anymore. Everyone is used to the fact that Trump is all talk. Well, let's put it this way. He has announced almost 40 times that he won the war with Iran. He has announced many times that Tehran has surrendered, that the regime has collapsed, that the army has been destroyed, and that the Iranian regime has no weapons left at all. And then again, new strikes, ballistic missiles are launched. In general, after all this, few people believe Trump, and because of this, the whole system of threats is falling apart. Today it became known that US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has recently informed colleagues from a number of allied countries that the US, quote, "for now, will refrain from military action against Iran. The main focus will be on increasing economic pressure on Iran through a naval blockade and new sanctions." Let me remind you, Trump has not achieved a single goal. He still hasn't gotten his war. Nevertheless, the situation in the Strait is more or less stabilizing. Every night, 15 to 20 tankers under the protection of the US Navy still manage to export about 10 million barrels of oil from the Persian Gulf. That's about half of the pre-war volume. but Iran itself can no longer export oil because of the blockade.
In the past 2 weeks, not a single tanker has been seen near Khark Island, the main center of Iranian oil exports.
Because of this, a gasoline crisis has already begun in Iran. In Tehran, fuel sales have been limited to 20 liters per person. Drivers are lining up in long queues at gas stations. According to Iranian government agencies, to meet the daily demand of 135 million liters, there is a shortage of at least 15 million liters. Overall, this situation is very similar to the Russian fuel crisis. That's why now people are drawing a direct parallel with Cuba. Why? The Americans similarly organized a naval blockade of Cuba at the beginning of the year to prevent fuel from getting there. But they still failed to quickly topple the communist regime. And according to all forecasts, the fuel in Cuba was supposed to run out completely in April, but the regime is still holding on. So this blockade is very long-lasting. It's a long and exhausting process. And now, exactly the same tactic that was used against Cuba is being applied to Iran. But in the meantime, according to Pakistani and Iranian media, the US and Iran have supposedly agreed to a ceasefire in the Middle East. And the agreements provide for free passage through the Strait of Hormuz. Supposedly, this kind of deal will be presented publicly in the coming days. But how many times have we already heard similar statements, and how many times have they not come true? So I'll leave it at that for now. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. And don't forget to like this video. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye everyone.